Melanie Kaplan has written a book that makes me really glad to have this show. It was just one of the best books I've ever read, even about, I don't know, the history of furniture making. You are which isn't a book I've ever read, and I don't know if there is one. You could make anything interesting, and I'm in awe of this book, Lab Dog. A Beagle and His Human investigate the surprising world of animal research with a gorgeous beagle in the front who isn't Hammy, the dog who inspired her and who is on every page of the book. Because Hammy was like more white and more particular. He didn't look like your rubber stamped beagle. But when I say this about your book and why I think everyone needs to read it, even if, oh God, I don't want to know about animal research. Oh, it's too sad. The Beagle Freedom Project, I can't read about it. The book isn't sad. It's very uplifting. It's wildly informative. But why I think the book's amazing is that in the process of telling your story and his story, very personal, full of anecdotes, very particular places the two of you went together to find out where he came from and how Beagle research happened. You have the whole history of animal welfare in the United States, how it grew, where it began. That was riveting to me. And it reminded me, in a funny way, of Seabiscuit, which I think is one of the very best books written, the very best nonfiction books written. It's supposed to be about a horse, but it's about so much more. Society, America, its changes. Did you surprise yourself as a first-time author, many-time journalist, but a first-time author, in how deep you went and how far back you went? Was that what you expected?
Thank you so much for saying that. Compare it to Seabiscuit is
You
just, oh
deserve
my
it.
gosh.
You deserve it.
Thank
Anyone who's
you.
read that's like the gold standard.
So it was a surprise because at every step of the way, I didn't really know where this was going. I just knew that I had to dive deep and really understand this in order to then come up from the deep and explain it to readers. But yeah, my brain was about to explode many days of reporting for many years.
Many years, more than four of putting this together. You got an award, a fellowship, something I've heard of, but I never knew what it was. The MIT Knight Fellowship, and that gave you the freedom, I don't know, something like at the McDowell Colony. Explain what it is. It sounds really impressive and like a big kudo to even get it, right?
I thought it was really a long shot. And this was the second year of the pandemic. And a friend of mine had done this. It's the MIT Night Science Journalism Fellowship. And he did it and he wrote a book. And it really, at the time, it was, or before my time, it was an in person fellowship in Cambridge. And you got to do classes at
Oh,
MIT and Harvard.
wow.
And because this was 2021, it was virtual. And so I applied, and then I was shocked to be invited to be a fellow. And the way they did it that year is they gave the fellows grants, and it was everything was virtual. So we did a couple check-ins during the semester on Zoom, and we really were on our own. And I took that grant money and I started reporting, and I stopped freelancing for a little bit just to get started and make some headway on what would become the book proposal.
Did that give you a kind of confidence and belief in yourself, or did it feel like more pressure? Oh my God, MIT is expecting a really stellar book from me, and I don't know exactly what this book's going to look like. Did you feel empowered or a little shaken by it?
I would say more empowered. It was
Good.
such a vote of confidence.
Yeah.
And the former director of the program, Deborah Bloom, wrote Monkey Wars, which was all about chimpanzee research and other non-human primate research. And that book is decades old, but it is still such a classic for this field. And when she called and let me know that she wanted to invite me to be a fellow, she said, I think this is a really smart proposal and a smart way to address this topic with one through one animal and a very personal story. And so that just made me feel so empowered.
I believe it because otherwise you could think, oh, this is going to seem girlish. I don't know. Forget what's politically correct. It'll seem like a girlish thing. Girl and her dog and her Snoopy dog, because you talk about Snoopy quite a bit in the book,
Just
off
like
and hit the
everything
road.
else. Every other idea, there's this little voice in your head that says, oh, that's really not a good idea. Nobody's going
Right.
to want to read this and you
Yes.
can't do it. And after that, I felt like, okay, maybe I can do this. But then, of course, you've got to get the vote of confidence from the agent and the publisher. And there's so
Right.
many other steps.
all of whom you thank and the thank yous. And the thank yous, I think, are sobering if anybody else would ever want to attack a big subject in a unique and novel way, which is you do need a support system. And if you can make one, find one, create one, encourage one, it's essential. It is a lonely endeavor, but also a daunting one because you're treading where others have gone before you. In the case of many fine nonfiction books about some animal topic, right? How are you going to do something that's different? Never mind better, different, unique, special. And I think this book, Lab Dog, someone could think, oh, I don't want to see pictures of dogs with electrodes inserted in parts of their body or read about them howling in a rusty cage. Your book isn't that. Your book is really asking, why are humans inflicting so much thoughtless, really unconscious misery on various animals? And you talk about the other kinds of animals with so little gain from it. And how do and why do people divorce themselves from their own conscience or emotions around it? You talk about that a lot in the book, and it's very interesting and makes you think, is this what makes me think? Is this what jailers can do in prisons with humans? Is there a way to cut off your emotion to the misery you're inflicting so that you stop caring? And at the end of the book, and we'll talk about the surrogacy idea at the end, which I found fascinating. What about that? Was that something that you went out to say, how can you guys do this? Look what you're doing to these dogs, and nothing good's coming of it. But you were never like that when you interviewed people. You were a true journalist. You asked good questions that got you information.
I set out certainly knowing that I had a bias because my bias was Hammy. And so I wanted everyone to know that I love this dog, and I never wanted to imagine this dog had been in a lab for almost 4 years. But the reality was that he did spend that time there. And so I just felt like my job as a storyteller was to listen to both sides, the researchers and the animal activists and the ethicists in the middle who are grappling with how do we how do we do this as a society? Do we get enough benefit from researching on animals? The answer is usually no. And how do we move forward in a kinder, more ethical way? I just saw that I would present this to the reader. And one book review said that I don't ever come out and say how I actually feel. And that's really deliberate. I
That's
wanted
right.
readers to read this. And this is such a personal, complicated thing to think about. And my point is that people don't even know. So we can't make a decision about this. We can't vote. We can't speak up about it if we don't know that it's happening.
And that it's happening across so many parts of the human landscape. You bring up a lot about products in the home. We know about the rabbits and Revlon and putting drops in rabbits' eyes to make sure mascara is okay. Those of us of a certain era, that was like the big no-no. Oh, look for animal-free tested mascara. That was the only thing being tested. And primates, because they're close to us, that's come up for a while because they were also kept in conditions which we could relate to as so lonely, and they're actually social animals. And that was the worst of it. Not even the harm physically done to them, but the emotional stress. What was being done to dogs in huge numbers, and 99%, I'm picking a number, is not a technical number, beagles, purpose bred.
Mhm.
So you talk about in Vigo, which on this show, I've talked to, I don't know, investigators who found out about this New York State, upper New York State, very hidden place of beagle production, where beagles are churned out from the same kind of genetic line to then be used so that can, so theoretically, test for, oh, I don't know, some childhood cancer that you'd think that's worth it. They could use those beagles, but also for all kinds of random, ridiculous, uninteresting, unnecessary, and useless tests are done. Were you able to get in there? You weren't, right? It's really controlled in Vigo. And they've also, have they not changed their name to something else and been put out of business? What's that whole story?
So when I began, there were three big beagle breeders, and I didn't even know the system existed. But when I say big, I'm talking thousands of
Yes,
beagles.
yes.
And so when I started, the biggest was Marshall, and that's the one in upstate New York. And then Vigo was in Virginia, and
Right.
Ridgeland is in Wisconsin. And so as I was reporting, an undercover video from PETA came out about in Vigo in Virginia, and the violations of that facility were just piling up and piling up. And between that and the undercover investigation and some new legislation in Virginia, it really just crescendoed, and that facility ended up closing in 2022. And as the 4,000 beagles got adopted across the country, and it made for a really lovely chapter in my book. I get so happy every time I
Yes.
would edit
One,
that chapter, because you have these beagles going everywhere
yes.
into
Yes.
homes, and it just feels like a very happy ending. The breeding facility in Wisconsin, Ridgeland, they actually just made a deal in the last few weeks with a special prosecutor in Dane County, Wisconsin, to stop breeding to sell for research. And that's a
Oh,
huge deal.
well,
So they might continue doing some breeding to do research internally on their own property, but they won't be selling anymore. And so that leaves us
wow.
just with the one in Marshall, in New York, which is Marshall, and they have more than 20,000 beagles there that they breed. And
This
that's
is
just bred for research.
okay. I hate that you call it breeding. I wish you would call it production. I wish we could talk about it I understand. You're a good,
No, you're right.
they
It
call
is
themselves
because
breeders. They're not. It's a production facility. They're
totally
producing
right.
these living, feeling, you know, charming, which as you explain and has been explained by others, beagles were chosen originally a nice compact size, but friendly. They like humans. It's in their DNA. Hi, human. Oh, okay. You can poke me, you can push me, you can do stuff, and I won't bite you, and I'll just stay alive because maybe one day Melanie Kaplan will come along and rescue me and give me a really good dog life. It's interesting about Marshalls. Those of you who listen to my show, Exotic Pets, I didn't know about Marshalls and the Beagles. I only knew they were the only ferret breeder in the United States.
Marshall started as a ferret breeder, and they only bred ferrets at the
Wow.
beginning, and
Right.
then they began breeding beagles or producing beagles to sell
Ouch.
them to the pharmaceutical companies, which were starting to need them in the 60s.
Wow. So when I interviewed the person from Marshalls, and she had said to me before we talked, so any of you want to go back on Exotic Pets and listen to my talk with her from Marshalls, she says, I can't really talk about the breeding facility for ferrets, where they also descent them, which is apparently a thing you need to do for a pet ferret. She said it's controversial, and I thought, what, the descenting of ferrets? How many ferrets are there? It's a very popular exotic pet, but is it that big a deal? It turns out now, which I didn't know until I read Lab Dog, it's the Beagles, people. It's like the red. Look at Haley's comment over here. It's the Beagles right over here. So that's really interesting. I got the impression, but not from your book, because again, you don't jump to conclusions. I'm an investigative journalist by background. I wouldn't jump to it and write it down, but I can say it on the air because I want everyone to think outside the box, think creatively, go further than the facts tell you and think, what if? Seemed to me that this Beagle production was like a I don't know what an assembly line. So if you make enough beagles, then the universities, which are veterinary colleges, so these are vets in training and teachers, many of whom have a DVM degree, they went into the field because they love animals. They going to get government money to do research. They have to make a proposal. Like you made a proposal to get an MIT Knight Fellowship. They make a proposal. We want to research X on dogs to find out if fleece could be allergenic. I'm making this up, but I wouldn't. Anything I can think of, someone's already done it. So they get $400,000, picking a number out of the air, and they get 50 beagles. But if there weren't a place producing the beagles, they couldn't get the grant, and the government wouldn't be giving them money. It's if you're going to make all these beagles, they have to go somewhere to do this work, and someone has to propose what the work will be and get the money from somewhere else. And yeah, it was taxpayer money if it was federal dollars. So it's almost like if two of the supply chains are cut off, from what you're saying, and are stopping doing it just because they didn't do it well or safely, not because they suddenly had a moral awakening, then it'll be interesting about those 20,000 beagles, Marshalls in upstate New York. I'm sure that some intrepid person wants to go up there and have a look see. Not you, I hope. I don't want you to get hurt. They probably have guns.
Well,
Oh, no, they
I
have
just
guns.
heard, I did just hear recently, because after Envigo closed in 2022, there was this question of, are the other companies going to start breeding or producing more beagles to make up for that? And somebody from Humane World for Animals just told me recently that they were not. So Marshall is not making more beagles to make up for
Oh,
Envigo's beagles. So that's good. What that tells us is either that some of the dog research that was happening before isn't happening now, or they are using that grant funding and using another animal. Sometimes
right.
they might move to a pig, which is also not
So sad.
good. Or maybe they are using some non-animal methods because there's just more and more of those, and it's really fascinating what's happening, that the area is growing, and hopefully we can reduce the number of animals and start using these other methods.
In the book, you do talk about other substitutes for animals and how they're viable and maybe even better scientifically. You also, in the book, have all kinds of experts. Oh my God, you talk to every single person I've ever heard of, ever had on this show, ever read about. You got every single expert in the entire field of animal research, animal welfare. It's an extraordinary work of investigative reporting, journalism, researching. And then if a book review said you didn't say your opinion, you should be patted on the back for that. All the stuff you took in, the rest of us, and maybe you too, would have had smoke coming out of our ears. And instead, you give us that information because a really great writer lets the reader figure things out, make decisions, come to conclusions. We don't really want to be force fed like a goose. Although you do talk at one point about some research thing that was about force feeding dogs with a feeding tube. But you don't go into gross, horrifying detail. You simply mention one of the lovely research experiments that involve that. And you say geese are force fed to make foie gras. So you make a lot of connections in a way that's really interesting. You connect the dots in a way that I think is really valuable for people.
I think that's just one of the just delightful things about doing nonfiction narrative and doing such a deep dive is there are so many of feelers out in so many places, and so
Yes.
you're bound to have connections, and
Yeah.
somehow the story comes together. And one other thing I was going to mention on letting readers decide for themselves, there's a book that I read very early in my reporting called Zoo Story. Do you know that, by Thomas French?
You mention it, book, but was not familiar with it.
Yeah, so he does such a good job of just reporting the story, and he talks about these elephants that are coming over from Africa to the zoo in, I believe it's in Tampa, and you get to know all the characters working at the zoo and the director
I'm
and
going to
some of
get
the
that book.
animal keepers, and you don't necessarily know how he feels. You're just reading about this is what's happening, and
Yeah.
here are the elephants' lives and their personalities and the people who love them, and it's quite good. And there's a pretty wild end to the story too.
Speaking of ends to the story, I think the conclusion of yours in terms of the ethics, the morals, the how do you put all these pieces together is so interesting. You came up with this idea of justice for just Hammy. You wanted to find someone who would say to Hammy, who'd been a researcher, how they would want to make reparations to him, restorative justice, which I guess in a way, is that what they had in South Africa? That amazing thing where everybody forgave everybody and they moved on without bloodshed and without hatred. Despite what's being said, South Africa, the black-white situation is fairly decent as I understand it in real life. No one's being slaughtered or taken down at gunpoint because because Mandela was the one who said, we can sit at a table and say we're sorry to each other, kind of thing. Is that what you wanted in that way?
I had learned about restorative justice several years earlier, and it just really got my attention because there's something about just my personality. I like being in the middle and I like hearing these different sides. And with restorative justice, you get a person who has been harmed, and a person who did the
Yes.
harming. You get them together at a table or with a community, and you try to walk away with a better situation and better understanding and appreciation for the other sides. And so I thought, what if I could find the person who researched on Hammy? And what if I could find the person who
Yes.
was running the facility where he was born. And that was a little bit fantastical. I did not find those people. But then along the way, somebody explained there's this idea of a surrogate. You know, there's other
Yes.
people who research
Yes.
on dogs who can play the role of the person who experimented on Hammy. So, what would that be like to talk to that person? And would that person apologize? Would that person meet Hammy and feel some emotion? And so I really wanted to create that setting of having a person like that and Hammy and me together in the room and
Yes.
just see how that would play out. And it was really interesting.
Very interesting. And I'm not going to give anything away except for to say that reading this book is a great tour through extremism of animal welfare, animal quote unquote rights throughout our history, coming up into the present, Hammy's present, your present, and then this idea of a surrogate and you looking for this person. And that's a story in and of itself. And I think it makes us all stop and think about all kinds of surrogates or restorative justice, or maybe we could even say we're sorry to people or animals, or we can't say we're sorry to our bacon, but you really make us stop and think. And I just want to say that I think you've done really an extraordinary job, a unique job of having us stop and think about how we live and what we do and all the creatures and the humans around us, well-meaning researchers, well-meaning veterinarians. I don't know if Beagle producers are well-meaning. To them, it's a job. Why is it that much different than producing little baby piggies and chickens and veal calves? I don't know. Just because we don't have them in our beds. You make us stop and think in ways that make us think and make us feel. You don't tell us what to think or feel. I think it's a really extraordinary achievement and a wonderful book to read. And anyone who wants to know how to write a great nonfiction book about a complicated subject full of emotion, Lab Dog, A Beagle and His Human Investigate the Surprising World of Animal Research. Melanie Kaplan, you should be so proud. And I hope that after you've taken a good deep breath, you'll come up with another topic to tackle because you need to get some more fellowships and write some more books. We need more books like yours. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
It's been a great pleasure. Take care.